Great. So thank you for the invitations and greeting from Bangkok. I'm quite excited that I am not up at 1 or 2 in the morning doing a presentation, which is often the case with the United States, so that the timing that you put together is fantastic. I was asked on a little bit of short notice to provide some remarks. I've had my team put together some information, and so I'm hoping it's relevant. As Dina said, I have spent most of my career in Asia. I founded the Tractus Asia 25 years ago. My brief bios there, people can look at it. I've been an angel investor, I've been an entrepreneur, and I've guided multinationals down to SMEs on their Asian strategies. We have offices in 7 countries. We have in Asia, and we assist both the private and public sector with their emerging Asia investment and growth strategies. And one of the things I wanted to do was talk a little bit about why it's relevant for me to be speaking to this audience. And there's a couple of things. One, through the course of our work over the years, we've advised a number of medtech, pharma, biotech companies. We've seen an increase in the last 5 years of everything technology, as is the case everywhere in the growth that's happening. And we're supporting many of our public sector clients to help those small and medium-sized enterprises, those startups, from the United States to look at what is their Asia strategy and how can they access not only the market here for their technologies, but also the capital, and have successfully helped several early stage companies raise funds, particularly in the med tech, which is really a compelling thing when you think about where we are with COVID. On a public sector standpoint, we currently advise 7 US states. And we work very closely with the US government. And so I wanted to tell you my sort of personal PPE COVID story. And so early on in the beginning of the year, because we are based in Asia and many of our clients were impacted with COVID immediately, having investments in China, we were asked to do crisis management. And then it quickly evolved where the states that we were under contract for were asking us to assist them with their PPE sourcing, for example, vetting some of the opportunities to buy masks and gowns and ventilators and things like that. And so our team very quickly was able to gain an understanding of what was happening and help those states avoid some of the pitfalls that were associated with that sort of Wild West market for PPE and medical equipment. And then in April, and I remember the date exactly, it was April 14th, I had an email from one of our largest clients, which is the underwear and sports apparel maker, Hanes Brands and Champion Brand. And it was from the president, and the title said, "Would you like to do something that's never been done before?" And I promptly deleted it thinking it was spam. And so the next day I got a phone call from the president of the company saying, "You don't respond to an email, an urgent email from one of your largest clients." Oops, sorry, looked in the deleted box and sure enough, there it was. And Hanes had been requested by the US government to make isolation gowns. And here's this large multi-billion-dollar, Fortune 100 company that was being asked not only to make isolation gowns, but a month earlier had been asked to make masks. And within 7 days of being asked to make masks was in production and ramped their production up to over 700 million capacity. And the call to me was about isolation gowns to refill FEMA's stock so that it could be distributed to the states with an inventory, because the inventory had been depleted. And you'll understand where I'm going with this, because I asked the president of Hanes, I said, "Why are you calling me?" And he said, "Because we can't do this internally. If we do this internally, we will fall victim to how a big multinational moves slowly." He says, "I'm calling you because I need that advice, guidance, and nimble decision-making to help us to be able to develop, source, and have produced isolation gowns from new vendors, because we don't have that internal capacity." And I said, "Okay, that sounds fine. How long? Six months?" And he said, "No, 6 weeks." He said, "By May 31st, we need to deliver 25 million gowns." And we did that. And that was a great learning experience for everybody involved about how to be nimble and how to look at opportunities within COVID. And I wanted to set the stage by talking about that. And then I'm going to talk about a few other things here that pertain to why I think collaboration between Asia Pacific and the United States on technology is really important at this point. If you look at this data, which was just downloaded from a website here, I think yesterday or the day before, because one of the reasons that Asia is in such a good position now, for the most part, is that COVID started in Asia, it started in China, it expanded as we heard before, but a lot of the countries in Asia have done a really good job of managing it, and they have social distance, they wear masks, hand washing, all of the things that are enabling these countries, the governments, and the people, the compliance with doing these things, regardless of whether it's been mandated or suggested, to remain safe. And so now what we're seeing is economic recovery. So China is actually forecasting a greater than 2% economic growth, somewhere between 2 and 3 by the end of the year, which I believe is actually a real number. We're seeing a lot of increased business looking at China. The rest of the region, while all impacted economically, is already recovering, where if you look at some of the other places like the United States, we're probably not yet to the deepest point of our economic slowdown due to COVID. Now, that doesn't include all of the Asian countries. India, Myanmar, Indonesia are all struggling. Larger populations, not as well developed, not as good public health care. Those are the ones that are going to struggle a bit. But if you're thinking about collaboration and you're thinking about technology collaboration, Asia is the place to start thinking about for both US and Asian ventures. I took this data from CBRE. This is the 15 major tech hubs in the Asia Pacific region. And I wanted to talk about it just a little bit. Some of the criteria there were 20 factors that CBR measured, things like business conditions, innovation environment, cost, availability, and these were the 15 leading cities. There's a whole number of cities behind this, whether you want to talk about small tech hubs in places like Chiang Mai, Thailand, or Jakarta, or in Malaysia, could be KL, Johor Bahru, Penang. So there's a lot of places that you may say, oh, they're not included on here, but they just weren't large enough or meet the criteria. And so the 3 things that were looked at for the study, business conditions, innovation environment, and cost availability, those were then benchmarked against Silicon Valley. And there's always this debate of how do we become the next Silicon Valley. And one of the things that this study did is it actually showed that some of the competitive factors of Asia were better than Silicon Valley. Now, Silicon Valley as a whole has, of course, been the technology growth hub for the United States for the last number of decades, and will continue to be. But I think what was really encouraging is that through private and public partnership, these tech hubs have been created in these cities that are not only spurring innovation, but they're starting to really get much better at commercialization. And as the wealth has transitioned from west to east in the past decade, you're seeing a lot more funding happening from these areas also. So COVID impacts technology, and it's impacted all of our business. Earlier, we heard about the supply chains being changed during COVID. I mentioned some of the crisis management we initially did was on supply chain work for some of our clients, not figuring out how they could get their goods or technologies or services, products in and out of China when COVID started. The work we did with Haynes had logistics and supply chain issues where everything was air freighted. If you think about everything arriving on 1 week in the United States by air cargo, but there have been some really interesting examples, and unfortunately, COVID has decimated the travel industry and hospitality and tourism. So whether you're a bricks and mortar operator or you're a technology operator, that business has gone way down. And then associated with it, exhibitions, trade shows, things like that. Now, I just spoke to a senior person at Marriott, and they're optimistic that as the pandemic wanes and better practices are put in place to continue with quality health prevention, that events and trade shows are going to come back a bit. But there's a big concern about the international holiday hospitality and tourism. Now, being in Thailand, we're seeing quite a bit of domestic tourism, which is interesting. It's of course not taking the place of that 20% GDP that international tourism did, but every week it's hard to get a hotel room in any of the local areas because everyone's traveling. We were talking about medtech and health tech. I think medtech and health tech is right on the verge of exploding in terms of its funding and development, and that really is because of the kickstart that COVID is giving it. The e-commerce has already boomed. If you look at e-commerce numbers, in just, as an example, the internet economy in 2015 was 32 billion in Asia. In 2019, it was 100 billion. In 2025, it's focused to be more than 300 billion. So the amount of money that's going into e-commerce is outstanding, and that's going to continue to boom. And COVID has only reinforced that by the inability to buy in the traditional bricks and mortar. We've seen a big uptick in fintech interest, mainly from global companies looking at how to launch fintech products in the region. But at the same time, there's a very strong fintech and developing fintech hub in Singapore. And so there's a lot of opportunities for collaboration there. Education is just determining how it's going to enable online learning beyond the Zoom classes. And I think we're going to see tremendous opportunities for investment and development and collaboration. And logistics and delivery has already significantly evolved. So while COVID has hurt the economies globally significantly, it has given a great benefit to these sectors, and especially from a technology side. Here's just some examples, and I know we had Alan from Spark Labs in Taiwan on, but here's some examples of Asian accelerators and their ecosystems that really make investments not only in Asia, but across the board. And it's growing quite fast. We have done previously some work on behalf of one of the states that we had worked with, the state of Minnesota, which happens to be my home state, so I'll give it a little plug. But we'd done some work with Medical Alley in collaboration with one of the government-funded accelerators in Singapore. And what was interesting is when that collaboration started, it was all about looking at how to take technologies that were being innovated in Singapore but not commercialized very well, and take the commercialization skills that we have in Minnesota, which is the largest med device hub in the United States, and bring that to Singapore. And that had resulted in a couple of interesting findings. One was, as you're looking at your technology and you're thinking about getting it funded, okay, if you're going to have cross-collaboration between Asia and the United States, there's some really important points. Number one, you have to have an Asia story. If your technology is purely focused on the United States market, investors in Asia won't be that interested. If there's an opportunity to also launch it in Asia, to be honest, it's a larger market, by a substantial amount. But if you can create an Asian story, you can often get funding in Asia to help develop the North American market within sort of the quid pro quo that as that's being developed, you will then follow on and develop within the region. And so there's lots of successful examples. Two of the countries in Southeast Asia that are doing a good job with that are Singapore and Malaysia. In East Asia, we're seeing a lot of the development in Korea and Japan. And Taiwan is also a very, very healthy investor and accelerator. And it goes without saying that China has also been investing in lots of companies. A little different model in China. It's still evolving, but lots of money in the ability to invest in companies. The next slide is just to talk about the value of deals and the volume of deals that are happening. Now, unfortunately, the data is not segmented versus on private equity and venture capital, or even down lower to angel investment. And I know we're talking about entrepreneurship, so we're really talking about Series A, angel investors, Series A investment. And so unfortunately, I can't break the numbers down, but I can share some of the trends. So if you think about the graph there on the left-hand side, you can see where the number of deals has remained very high. In fact, in 2019, it was at an all-time high, even though the value of those deals was significantly below the previous year. The previous year is an anomaly due to a couple of large investments, so that shouldn't be, take those out and it's not quite so high. But what's encouraging is that during 2019 and 20, during the COVID, the number of deals has not dropped that much. Okay, the value's gone down a little bit, which is expected. Okay, and then if you look at the pie chart there on the top right, as would be expected, the largest number of investments are really going into this $0 to $10 million range, which is your early stage investment. So there's still an appetite and there's still investment going on. It's being driven by the APEC investments being driven, not surprisingly, out of the United States, or maybe surprisingly, followed up by India, Singapore, China, Indonesia. I think the one thing that any investor should be thinking about right now, or sorry, any entrepreneur should be thinking about right now, is that there is more money, as it's called, dry powder, sitting on the sidelines that hasn't been employed. During COVID, investors have been more conservative. And if you think about how investors think, there's about $2.5 trillion of private equity money that was accumulated in 2019, just sitting to be invested. That's starting to be employed. The venture capital investors, they're a little more risk averse. They have a larger stake in what they're doing, so they haven't yet started to put quite as much money into play. And then some of the smaller family offices or the individual investors are waiting to see how things evolve with COVID. But that money's there, and for the right idea and the right opportunity, particularly in those technology segments with a focus on healthcare right now, you can raise funds. Here's just some examples of some of the acquisitions. I said acquisitions, I guess I should say investments. Some were acquisitions completely, some were investments, but all in that sort of smaller range. And there are a lot more examples beyond this. So what is the overall message? The overall message that I'm trying to send is that despite COVID and despite what it's done to our economies, that those entrepreneurs that are already nimble and able to think outside of the box and rethink how they do things are in a great position to get funded, despite the conservative nature right now of the investors. There is support that we heard about earlier in the panel, the collaboration, whether it's a US government agency, whether it's an accelerator funded by an Asian government. There are tremendous resources out there. And I really like this program because we just went through the pitches of those amazing companies and their technologies here for people to review. There are lots of venues in Asia to do that. There are lots of venues to do that in the US. And my advice to anyone pitching, having been a judge in those, is practice. Practice, do it, listen to the advisors. There's money there, and you're going to raise money, and you need to be persistent. Okay? And don't worry, as these dinosaurs are on the right-hand side, about the economy. Just worry about yourself and how you're going to position it, because you can raise money. And learn from Asia. Okay, Asia has been successful. They've transitioned through COVID for the most part very well. And unfortunately, I believe the COVID pandemic is going to be here to stay. And so I think it's really important for all of us, as we look at that collaboration and we look at our futures, to do it in light of the pandemic and realize that there are economic opportunities and you can make money during this time. That's all I have, and yet that's it. And I hope everyone found that useful. And I know we're getting late, so people are going to want to get to bed soon.